Chapter 2 of Eyes on You. First Impressions. Trixie. A wonderful wave of luxurious relaxation spread throughout Trixie's entire body as she woke from her beautiful dream. She felt the warm caress of the sheets that covered her, the soft embrace of the mattress that held her. For as long as she could remember, she had never woken feeling quite as content as this. The wide, comfortable smile on her face faded quickly, however, as she tried to move her foreleg and was stricken with sudden pain. It wasn't all that intense, but it was enough to skip her through the next beautiful, blissful stages of partial unconsciousness. Who dares to disturb Trixie's rest? She thought angrily. Her eyes flashed open and hunted for the culprit. There was nobody else in the room. What she did notice was the woolen cast around her foreleg, sight which she sighed gloomily. Wait, nobody else in the room? She didn't remember falling asleep here. The last thing she did recall was getting to her hose in the hospital tent. So this must be... As if on cue, the door creaked open a few inches and a familiar lavender nose appeared, followed by a pair of lilac eyes, which glanced nervously towards Trixie. "Oh, you're awake!" Twilight Sparkle said, with an annoyingly cheerful smile on her face. She arrogantly pushed into the room, without asking Trixie's approval, and approached the bed. Naturally, Trixie opened her mouth to voice her displeasure at the intrusion. Her words were cut off as she caught the sight of the tray of food, which hovered in midair. "I made you breakfast," said the purple intruder, with a wider and prouder smile on her face. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a bit of everything." Twilight Sparkle set the tray down onto the tree stump and smiled at Trixie again. "And, in case you need anything else, I'll just be downstairs. Feel free to give me a shout any time." "She's enjoying this, isn't she?" thought Trixie with a scowl. "Enjoying the sight of a powerless Trixie. Well, I'll show her who's powerless." Trixie's attempt to sit upright was thwarted by a stabbing pain in her flank. She collapsed back down on the pillow and cringed with hurtful embarrassment. "Are you okay?" cried the purple unicorn in alarm. She feigned sympathy only to hurt more. "Trixie, it's fine," growled the showmare. "Your continued mockeries are really necessary." "Mockeries?" Twilight stammered, taking a step back. "I was just worried that you might hurt yourself." "The great and powerful Trixie does not need your compassion, Twilight Sparkle," said Trixie hotly, skillful emphasis on the word compassion. "She is not weak, and she does not approve of your patronizing demeanor. But good day, Twilight Sparkle!" Trixie glared at the dejected purple unicorn until she left the room. Trixie's frown did not fade after the intruder had left. She didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel any better taking her anger on Twilight Sparkle, even if she was deserving of it. Her frustration seemed to have robbed her of her appetite, so she didn't even glance at the tray of food from which the familiar aroma of cinnamon apple pancakes, her favorite, was emanating. Instead, she closed her eyes tightly and pulled the bed sheets up to her chin with magic, which probably shouldn't have been as difficult as it was. Obviously, her well-placed raids was hampering her concentration. Deciding to come back to Plainfield was a terrible mistake. If not for that incident in the woods, she probably would have realized that a lot sooner. She didn't even remember why she had wanted to come back here in the first place. With a grumpy sigh, she buried her head in the pillow and tried to forget about everything, just for a while. Trixie cautiously trotted along through the dense woods, the trailhead becoming even narrower. The sky above was ominously dark, and creepy shadows seemed to stalk her every move, flickering in her corner of her eye and fancying just as when she turned to look. "Perhaps this shortcut wasn't such a good idea," Trixie thought as the silver-reducing hoot of an owl gave her a start. The ever-free forest. She could have sworn it hadn't been like this when she last passed through here. "Why didn't she go through Whitetail Woods? That's a nice location!" Her sense of foreboding only intensified to dread as she recognized the twisted rock formation on her left. She had been here before, not just in this place, but this very moment as well. How was that possible? She knew what came next. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't convince her host to obey her. She just kept trying forwards, unwavering, as if some strange voice were commanding them along this path. Her power over her body seemed to be limited. She could only do things exactly as they had happened, like following a script with assisted play. She didn't want to be here again, especially she couldn't change it. There it was, the howling. That loud, dreadful howling from all around her. Now her host had stopped, just as he was willing to desperately to move faster. The cold seemed to creep into her skin as demonic figures emerged from the trees and blocked the trail ahead. The massive, scraggy black cloaks blotted out the background. Their low, guttural growl sent icy chills down her spine. Their glowing red eyes reached into her very soul and gripped it with terror. They kept towards Trixie, dark, boding evil without number or solid form. The frightened and prowless Trixie begged her body to obey her, but they still wouldn't listen. The figures came ever closer, while each step they took blotting out a little more of the rest of the world. The lead creature, larger and more terrible than the rest, the embodiment of fear itself, slowly pushed off from the ground and soared towards Trixie. Trixie rolled to the side, almost too late, barely avoiding the beast's vicious claws. With her control finally restored, she brought her forelegs into the air and slammed on the ground, sending up a disorienting cloud of magical smoke. She didn't waste any time galloping off into the tree line, hoping that her little trick would throw out the beast for a while. But it was barely a few seconds before she heard pounding footfalls and baleful growls were behind her. Another dark figure burst out from a bush just ahead and bounded towards her. In desperation, Trixie focused her magic towards it and sent forth a blinding beam of light which seemed to disperse the specter in a puff of black smoke. 2 more hounds took its place, both larger, both darker, both snarling vengefully. With heart pounding, Trixie dipped and dived through the trees, fighting the ferocious shouts that came at her from everywhere. She cast the occasional cantrip in an attempt to warn them off, while they seemed to make them angrier. Finally, she burst out into a large clearing and, in her panic, caught her foreleg on an unseen root. She clasped her knees. That was it. She couldn't run any more. As dark figures began to emerge from all sides, she cried out for help. Her powerful voice resounded throughout the clearing, but the only reply she received was the harsh barking of fiendish hounds. She caught sight of the massive alpha wolf again, and gazed at the terrifying pits of flaming hatred that were his eyes. The circle of icy darkness began to close in on her. Trixie wasn't going to let them get her. She had very little knowledge of spells that could physically protect her, but she wasn't helpless. Fiercely baring her teeth at the lead wolf and pouring all her magical reserves into her horn, the unicorn began to channel the most powerful spells she could think of. The grappled bursts of white light exploded from her horn and pushed back the dark figures. The air crackled with magical energy as 6 large radiant orbs began to swirl around in midair, forming a shield of light around the unicorn. Shouting wolves burned under its glare, but they only retreated a few steps. The pain expression on Trixie's face must have been obvious. They knew she couldn't have kept this up for long. Trixie closed her eyes tightly and focused harder. Every second that passed made it more difficult for her to maintain the spell. Her muscles ached. Her head was burning. She felt the magic dissipating from the air around her. The light was dimming, she could tell. Suddenly slammed into her left shoulder with all the force of a speeding freight train and sent her crumbling to the ground. Even as she collapsed, she felt a burning sensation that cut through her flank. She let out another yell. All seemed lost as she lay there cringing in pain. She felt darkness encroaching, as she knew that her spell had ended. As the heat drained from her body, she boldly opened one eye and stared defiantly at the alpha wolf, who was growling in his triumph to his pack. His smugness was not the last, however. A massive beam of purple shot forth from the trees and swallowed the massive beast with half of his pack. From the tree line emerged another figure, not dark and ominous, but bright and beautiful, glowing with lavender-colored hope. The nightmarish creatures yelped and whined as they were washed away by the sheer radiant light from this gorgeous creature. In a matter of seconds, all but 2 mares had been reduced to the clouds of black smoke, which quickly dissolved into nothingness. The new arrival approached, and its luminescence engulfed Trixie. It seemed to melt away all of her pain and doubt. The icy chill of the forest, and indeed the forest itself, began to fade away. Trixie knew she was safe. The mare lavender light smiled kindly and extended a hoof. Trixie couldn't see who it was, but it didn't matter. She painlessly lifted her foreleg and reached towards the warm embrace of the unicorn's light. My! Wasn't that opening lavender realistic? But still, I do like the fact that we have a badass Twilight. Thank you, Fic. Thank you so much. Trixie opened her eyes and blinked a few times, restoring her connection to the physical realm. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to feel after a nightmare like that. Or was it a nightmare? The dark figures had been utterly terrifying, of course, but there was something about that shining purple unicorn that made her seem insignificant, like it didn't matter at all. She closed her eyes and tried to recreate the scene in her mind. Her memory of what really happened was hazy at best, but there was one thing she knew for sure. If it wasn't for Twilight Sparkle, I would be dead. They made twice now, and Trixie wasn't sure what to do about it. On the one hand, she felt naturally indebted to Twilight, that she could do something to show her gratitude. But on the other hand, she was ashamed of herself, ashamed that she had been overwhelmed by a menagerie, a pack of wolves. Embarrassed she hadn't been powerful enough to take down Ursa Minor, a baby. And that blasted purple unicorn had been the one to pull Trixie's flank out of the fire each time. How could she, having lived a pampered life in Ponyville, possess more powerful than the great and powerful Trixie? It's not fair, she thought, her foul mood returning. As Trixie, have I not worked harder, having spent my life on the long, hard road? Should I not be the stronger? I see that she... Trixie paused mid-thought. Something disturbing just occurred to her. Am I jealous? No, it couldn't be. The great and powerful Trixie, envious of some lowly village dweller? Ha-ha! Unthinkable. So, now explain the unprovoked anger when she felt whenever she saw Twilight Sparkle, as well as the unshakable feeling she had proven herself to some pony. Was that it then? Jealousy? This is ridiculous, she growled mentally. Trixie steadily struggled to a sitting position, fighting back the pain. Yes, it hurt, but that didn't matter. If Trixie did not want it to affect her, then it would not affect her, for she was the great and powerful Trixie, mastered by none, not even her emotions. Regardless of whether or not she was jealous of Twilight Sparkle, the fact remained the purple unicorn had saved her life. It's a matter of principle, she thought, trying to convince herself. I owe a debt to Twilight Sparkle, and I cannot pay it if I am constantly letting my envy get in the way. I may not like her, and she may not like me, but we can settle this reasonably, that I may not come back here at all. Her mind was clearer now than it had been in the angry haze of that morning. She remembered her reason for returning to Ponyville. Acting on reflex, she flicked her horn slightly and summoned a familiar brown paper envelope from thin air. She didn't open it. She knew exactly what the letter inside said, almost word for word. She just sat there, levitating the envelope about a foot from her face, and stared at the word Trixie on the front, written in this tiny, dignified scrawl. This was the letter that brought her back here. It only took a moment of thoughtful gazing before she knew what she had to do. In a flick from Trixie's horn, the envelope vanished, and the mayor's mouth curved into a confident smile. The next time Twilight Sparkle walked through that door, Trixie would do what she had come back to do. It occurred to her that this might not be as easy as it sounded. It might not be a bad sign that her mind was eager to get off this topic as soon as possible. It was too late to consider that, though, for Trixie had already had her attention onto more important matters. Namely, that sweet smell of cinnamon and apple that was drifting over from her bedside tree stump. Her stomach gave a muffled growl as she laid her eyes on the untouched breakfast tray. Everything looked delicious. Of course, when one hadn't eaten for days, that could be said for pretty much anything. Anything except that bowl of green, goopy suds, which looked more like a facial care product than it did vegetable soup. Trixie magically lifted the off-putting bowl of grunts and hid it behind a stump out of sight. She brought the tray over and rested it on her lap, staring hungrily at the small stack of round pound cakes in the corner. With absolutely no regard for coloring, Trixie levitated 2 of the pancakes to her mouth and took a generous bite. They were cold and rather chewy, but tasted divine. Not bad, she thought to herself as she wolfed down the last of the pancakes in no time at all. In fact, it had been a long while since she tasted anything that delicious, but she wasn't about to admit that, considering they were made by Twilight Sparkle. With the pancakes gone, Trixie frowned. Now she could see all the food up close, it didn't look quite as appetizing. So levitating one of the grossly malformed greenest masses from her tray and eyed it carefully. Being as hungry as she was, she optimistically saw it as a rustic grass waffle. Rustic to the point, it looked like at some point had dropped it on the floor and stepped on it repeatedly. The pancakes had been that delicious, that is to say adequate, that the waffles couldn't be too bad. She decided not to let the appearance put her off, but the taste didn't give her a choice. Once she had taken such a large bite, Trixie glanced easily around for somewhere to dispose of this. Frankly, the adjective that describes this level of disgustedness had yet to be invented. To make matters worse, there came a sudden series of knocks at the door. Trixie, may I come in? Trixie took one last desperate glance around the room before sullenly conceding. Though the incredible force of will, she managed to swallow the mutant waffle. Once sent a horrible shudder through her entire body. Never again, she thought, still pale-faced when she levitated the tray back onto the tree stump. Never again. Trixie? Twilight's voice came. The Showmare shook herself off and faced the door, longing for a tube of toothpaste. She put on her most confident face and cleared her throat. Ahem! You may enter. The next time Twilight Sparkles walks through that door, do what you came back to do. It had been a good concept, but the very sight of Twilight's determined eyes as she tried through the room told Trixie it wasn't going to be that simple. Trixie's emotions had suddenly decided to oppose the idea. It took her a brief moment to get them in check. Twilight presumably took the silence as a cue to speak. Trixie, Twilight. Trixie interrupted urgently, still wrestling with her pride. I know what you're going to say, but I assure you it was an entirely Sus! Trixie was taken aback. Did Twilight Sparkle just shush her? Did you just listen to what I have to say? Demanded the purple unicorn. The forceful attitude was annoyingly admirable, but being cut off mid-sentence wasn't helping Trixie repress her emotions. Twilight continued, I brought you something. Trixie paused for a moment at this unexpected announcement. Whilst jealousy and pride were busy tussling each other, curiosity stepped forward and took its place on the stage. Oh, is that so? Trixie said, trying to sound only mildly interested. Well, what is it? Without moving, Twilight levitated small wooden boxes to the room and sat next to Trixie's bed. She gestured confidently with a hoof. See for yourself. Cautiously, the Soulmare looked at the boxes in her lap. It was unexpectedly light. In fact, it must have been nearly empty. The lid was already loose, so Trixie wasted no time in pushing it open with her good hoof and taking a look inside. Oh, thanks, Celestia, she thought. She noticed the relieving absence of mutant grass waffles. But what is this? For a moment, she thought the light was playing tricks on her. Just to make sure, she focused her magic on the box's contents and lifted them in the air. Trixie couldn't believe her eyes. Sure enough, there hovered a purple, familiar cape. Again with the cape thing! God, I heard rumors that Trixie wears her heart on her cape, but I didn't think I would find it! My God. I became friends with Trixie because we agreed to open a studio together, and she knew I needed a boss to help out. We became friends over time. Beautifully patterned with various shapes and sizes, in all shades of blue and yellow and Twilight Sparkle, breathed Trixie gently, momentarily forgetting her conflicted emotions. Where did you find this? Oh, by the way, I'm not the only one who's a little miffed that every single plushie of Trixie doesn't come with her hat and cape. Am I? It doesn't matter, Twilight said dismissively, the smile coming back to her face. But it wasn't easy. I had to call in a few favors. Well, maybe more than a few. Oh, hi, said Trixie, narrowing her eyes in suspicion as she looked down towards the smiling unicorn. Why go to all that trouble? Because, began Twilight, taking a step forward, you've obviously got the wrong impression of me. I'm not here to mock or patronize you. I wanted you to show that... Trixie rarely found herself at a loss for words. But it was one of those times. Her emotions were beginning to get tangled up with one another, making it hard to figure out how she was supposed to react. But what? I'm sorry, alright? Twilight interrupted as she stared honestly into Trixie's eyes. I don't think you're weak. She's sorry, thought Trixie. The conversation was getting more confusing by the second. I should probably say something. Twilight Sparkle, I cannot allow you to... The purple unicorn held up a definitive hoof. I'm not taking no for an answer. You keep that cloak as a gift from me. All I ask in return is you relax and let me help you out once in a while. Now Trixie was completely lost. Twilight Sparkle was making no sense at all. What kind of request was that in exchange for a gift such as this? Trixie does not understand, said the Soulmare helplessly. Why would you do this? Twilight smiled softly. Because sometimes we all just need to be shown a little kindness. With that, the purple unicorn just up and left the room, leaving a stunned Trixie in her wake. As Twilight closed the door behind her, Trixie became alone with her thoughts once again. It took a few moments for the storming sea of emotion within her to calm itself, but when it did, the Azure Unicorn performed a mental face-off. She's far too proud to tell Twilight why she had come back to Ponyville, which made the whole thing seem like a big waste of time. Of course, Twilight's constant interruptions didn't help. If Trixie had gotten a word in edgeways, then maybe...
Oh, who am I kidding? She thought solemnly. Maybe I should just leave now. There's no point in staying in Ponyville.
But the idea of leaving brought the letter straight back to her mind, followed by his visage, shaking his head in disappointment.
Shut up, old man!
She snarled angrily, banishing the vision.
If you hadn't sent that stupid letter, then I shouldn't even be here!
Oh God, don't tell me I got another evil Trixie parrot on my hooves! Not again! You know, I miss pulling POV sometimes. At least Trixie's parents there were reasonable. Right now, she genuinely believed that, but some voice deep in her side of her knew that her anger was misplaced. She sighed. Whether she liked it or not, she wasn't going anywhere. She loved now that she would never be able to drive these distracting thoughts from her mind. She began to look around slowly, as if something in the room would help her solve the dilemma. Inevitably, her eyes fell on that little cape that now lay in her lap.
A little kindness,
she repeated softly. She ran her hoof across the soft fabric. She hugged the garment close to her chest and laid her head down on the pillow once more, thinking. The words echoed through her head over and over as she tried to make sense of them. Wasn't it the prospect of giving and receiving gifts was unknown to Trixie? Her fans sent her gifts all the time. They saved for Gracie with her incredible performances. But making a sacrifice of oneself when there was nothing to be gained in return?
Generosity for the sake of kindness.
It does seem downright unreasonable. Did Twilight Sparkle really think that? Did Ain't Pony? Trixie didn't have to admit that was a nice thought. She did have to admit it made it curious. Maybe, since he was going to be sticking around anyway, a bit of subtle research into that mindset would be prudent.
Very well, she thought with a shrug. Anything to take my mind off of that letter for a while. I'll get around to figuring out that later.
With that last assurance to herself, Trixie closed her eyes and inhaled the scent of her cape. It wasn't quite the same as she remembered. The scent, that is. But even without his counterpart, the magician's hat, the cape reminded her of him. Normally it would have been a nice memory, but having him butting into her thoughts every 5 minutes was very irritating. She dispelled the image from her mind, thinking back to Twilight's mystifying words. The silent consideration of which would occupy Trixie for the rest of the day.
Just a little kindness.